Hello and welcome to Audible River. I'm Alan Rice, and I am very happy to have with me natural philosopher and author Michael Alan Prestwood. Michael is the creator of touchstonetruth.com with many amazing articles on philosophy, science, critical thinking, and history. Michael's most recent book is called 30 Philosophers, A New Look at Timeless Ideas. Hello, Michael. It's great to be with you today.
Thanks, Alan. I'm very happy to be here.
I want to start by asking you, what is a natural philosopher?
So it's kind of a throwback title because I'm not a scientist, and I'm not a philosopher in the sense that I dabble in the unknown and the unknowable exclusively or primarily. And so to me, a natural philosopher is kind of a old school term for somebody who looks at philosophy from an empirical view, meaning from a science first lens. So when I look at human ideas, I look at them from the center position of an empirical science first view. And then, of course, sometimes you can only find answers for the unknowable and the unknown in the clouds of belief systems. And sometimes you have to explore extreme doubt, which would be the other side of the spectrum, where with true skeptics who sometimes don't believe anything.
Wow, yeah. So that's a big range, and I can, I have to say right off the bat. I mean, I've looked at your website, and I said amazing in the introduction, and I'll say it again. It is amazing. I mean, your perspective, or I won't say your search for knowledge and your willingness to share it, is it's very impressive. And because, like you said, you are looking at everything from a lens of, you said science or empirical based. I'm interpreting that as like, show me the evidence sort of thing. It's like I need proof that this is real sort of thing. And but it's very accessible. And I've been pouring through your book. And one of the things that I find really helpful is that your concept of touchstone ideas. I mean, you've like crystallize these little bits and pieces that sort of hang together this realm of philosophy. You want to talk a little bit about the touchstone ideas and how you came up with that and what it means?
Sure. So my book, 30 Philosophers, is on all of human thought, which is a ridiculously large subject. So in order to anchor oneself, you kind of have to stay focused on only the things that are provable, because there are lots and lots of ideas. I mean, every human ever born has had lots of ideas every day. Every day people think of wonderful things. They may not write them down. They may not remember them tomorrow or the next day, but we all have great ideas. And quite frankly, even the great philosophers, the 30 philosophers I focused on in the book, they're in there because they had great new, or at least the oldest ones we know about, ideas. But every one of them have just crazy ideas by today's standards. For example, I have to be sensitive here because, I definitely believe in 100% freedom of conscience, and that people have a right to believe whatever they want. And there's pretty much no one that exists that doesn't believe some things that are not provable. So, but going all the way, so let's go all the way back to Pythagoras. Pythagoras is sometimes called the father of numerology because he saw mathematics in nature, and that part of his work has stood up great. And so that part of it, everybody accepts. And then the numerology part of it, where he read into the numbers more than was there, became what scientists would call a pseudoscience, and believers would call their belief system. And so, because everybody has such beliefs, centered common knowledge beliefs as well as out there beliefs, I had to find a way to talk about that and tell the story of the last 5,000 years of human thought. So what I did was I picked 80 ideas, stepping stones, touchstones is what I call them, and my website's touchstonetruth.com, and of the most important ideas that progressed human thought forward. The book does dabble in the unknown and the unknowable, but from a very respectful point of view. Like, for example, each of the 30 philosophers, at the end of each chapter, I talk about their afterlife beliefs and what they believed happens to you when you die, in their metaphysical framework and things like that. So it does dabble in that, but kind of in a respectful way, because we all have a right to believe anything we want.
I find that that to me helps it feel comprehensive, and that you're being honest about what you're learning, and that's the impression that I get, and that of course we all have, being alive, that there are things we don't know, there are things that we sort of accept as real, whether we have proof or not, but what you're talking about there is like, I mean, I've talked to people who call themselves mystics, people who are, into the more spiritual realm and that sort of thing. But one of the things that comes up in talking with people who are like into that stuff is like, how do I know what's real? I mean, this is something that vexes people who are like, I have these experiences, I have these things, I think that I know what it is, but how do I prove to myself what's real and what's not? And I think that that's something that you go into quite a bit in the philosophies, and you want to talk about that. How do you know what's real?
Sure. Yeah. So in the way I did that in the book is in the introduction, which kind of talks a little bit about the viewpoint of the book, kind of the things we've been talking about how the book is talks about all these ideas, but from a center viewpoint of a science, what do we have evidence for viewpoint. In that prologue, I say something like, I know absolute truth exists, but is deceptive. And then I never mention absolute truth again until chapter 18. And I did that very much on purpose because it steers up a big hornet's nest, for one thing. But and I had to get through the first couple thousand years of human thought. And then in chapter 18, I talk about the kind of the traditional views of indirect and direct realism, and Plato versus Aristotle, and I kind of go over the traditional views of that, which are very murky, and then I pivot and introduce one of my own ideas. So one of the subtitle for the book is A New Look at Timeless Ideas, and what I did is I tried to present all of the ideas, or 80 ideas at least, of that withstood the test of time, and I tried to take a fresh look at them. Like, for example, one of your recent podcasts was on Confucianism, and Confucianism, there's a lot of experts out there, tons of them. I'm not an expert, but I had to write a chapter on Confucianism.
Mm-hmm.
And so from my viewpoint, from my science first viewpoint, and in telling the story of human thought over the last 5,000 years, what I did is I talked about the concept of normal. So my approach to Confucianism talks about normalcy and how that happens to an individual and to a society and to humanity, and how it evolves over time. And of course, most people understand that Confucianism was about order and about if you're a farmer, be a farmer. If you're a leader, be a leader. If you're a mother, be a mother. That type of thing. It was all about order and the norms for these different roles in society, and the idea that if we all play our roles well, we have a harmonious society. And so I kind of boiled all that down to a core concept of normalcy, and how does the concept of normal enter into your mind? And so that's a whole thing we could do a whole hour on all by itself, by the way. But
I bet. I mean, there's 1,000 things at least that we could do a whole hour on. I mean, that I see right away.
Yeah.
So one of the things that comes to mind that in looking at the book, I mean, the first impression that I get is like, okay, this, we're talking about thousands of years of human thought. That's what you were just saying. Now, in your understanding, is there a way that you can talk about, like, I mean, I imagine like every philosopher or thinker or whatever whatever time that you're in, and when I've read ancient text, there's a very different way of thinking for the people who live in that time and place. And what is your understanding of how philosophy has developed from, you know, periods of history that have to do with where these people lived in the time that they lived in? I mean, what was available to them, that sort of thing, and how that's changed coming forward.
Sure. Um, so in that, I think I'd like to just paint a little picture. So let's stay in Western philosophy for the moment,
Okay.
although you can direct me anywhere you want, but let's stay in Western philosophy for a moment.
Okay.
So before Socrates, we had the pre-Socratics like Heraclitus, Thales, and others. And they weren't called philosophers back then. They were called sophists, and they practiced Sophia, not philosophy. And Socrates came along, and remember I talked about the core center position of, show me the evidence, and then we have the clouds of believers that are exploring the unknown and the unknowable. We
Mm-hmm.
don't have answers for those. Fair game to explore them. They could be right. Somebody has to guess first about what it is, and then we try to look for evidence. And there are things out there that probably don't have any evidence and will stay in the belief system forever. And then on the other side, we have the skeptics who say, I don't believe it at all. And so in the book, for example, I use, I think it was Epicurus. I forget who I use, but there's a tower story that comes to us from ancient times, like 100, 200 BCE, after the time of skepticism, which I wrote about a century later. There's a story of a tower where you can see a tower off in the distance and it looks round, but as you get closer to it, it becomes square. And that was an ancient lesson to people that your perceptions are not always what you think they are, and that you need to validate things that you think you are looking at. And so skepticism went down that road, and all this is coming back around to Socrates. And now Socrates is wasn't the first skeptic, but he's kind of the earliest skeptic, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
or one of the earliest ones, or at least one of the most famous earliest ones. And he came along and he poked fun at the pre-Socratics, at the other philosophers. Why do you believe that? Why do you believe that? How do you know that? And so by challenging the pre-Socratics, he was able to introduce the concept that we should be skeptical and ask questions and look for evidence. And at least that's a valid way of thinking as part of one's thinking. So when you're living your life and you're trying to uh, figure out um, how to uh, what to buy or whatever, you've got to look at some evidence and like that. Now there are aspects of your life that we don't know anything about, and so we have to um, you have to have faith, and you have to be presented with doctrine and with information, and you have to make a decision, and you have to decide what you believe and what makes sense to you personally.
Right. Like, do I take the new job kind of thing?
Yeah.
Right. Like, there's those kind of decisions where yeah, you have to decide based on your gut. But then there are things, like you said, like, I mean, those practical decisions, like, well, it can get mixed up, but there are definitely research that can be done to help us make decisions, that we think we're making in our best interest. Philosophers have influenced culture over time. I mean, these ideas get into the way people think. It becomes like, embedded into the culture and even the law of the land, so to speak. I'm just wondering if you can, where we're at today, like in our current, like where we're at. We're living in the U.S. Current culture, whatever. Can you point to things that you recognize that have their roots in philosophers going back? It can be recent or ancient. I mean, does anything trigger your mind when I say that things are happening now, or stories or whatever that come from ancient philosophers or philosophy in general?
Well, kind of the one thing about ideas is if they're good ideas, they stick around. And so every idea that we have nowadays has its origins. And that's actually what my book is about. The whole book is about what's the earliest known reference to yin and yang? What's the earliest known reference to the unknowable Tao? What's the earliest known reference to skepticism and to ethics and virtue ethics and like that. So every idea we have today that we as a group might call common knowledge has roots going all the way back. In addition to that, most of the ideas that we have nowadays that are about the unknown and the unknowable, numerology, astrology, all of them, have roots going all the way back as well. I chose not to focus on those because, I mean, my book is 510 pages. It would have been 10,000 pages if I, gone down that road.
That's right. You got to call it somewhere, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's common knowledge. The thing that we all think is true, like the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. We can agree on that. We might have debates about cause and effect, with as in what Hume brought up and said, hey, just because the sun rose one day doesn't mean it's necessarily going to rise the next day. We can have philosophical debates about that, but we can all agree that the sun rises in the east and it sets in the west, and so far it has happened every day. And so that common knowledge, all of those have origins someplace. So, for example, Stoicism, which evolved about 300 BCE, was there's a famous fisherman merchant who was kind of like a lot of people are today, chasing life and riches and fame and he had his boat and he's going up and down the coast of Greece and trading and making money and like that. And now this is somebody who lived slightly after Aristotle and Plato and Socrates. So Socrates was who I've been calling the original skeptic and what we're talking about right now. His student Plato was kind of dabbled in the realm of forms and kind of more mystical type philosophy. And then his student Aristotle dabbled in the empiricism. So in Western philosophy, we have kind of a natural split between Plato and Aristotle, not all that unlike the split in Eastern philosophy between Confucianism and Taoism. They both have a split that, from a logical point of view in your mind, you can kind of look at these ideas and organize them and embrace whichever ones you want and that type of thing.
Right.
But anyway, so Hero of Elis, who was born just like 20 years after Aristotle died, something like that. And he was the guy who's going up and down the coast in his boat, and the legend is, and it seems to be one of those legends that you could be like, okay, it's mostly true at least. And kind of the way I tell it in the book is he's going up and down the coast, pursuing riches, and I need more money, and give me this for that, and he hits a storm, his boat sinks. He manages to crawl onto one of the many islands off of Greece, and he's laying on the beach there, just depressed, like, I've lost everything. Now, in my book, I do say at that point, that's when he had the idea that my thoughts and only my thoughts are harming me. And I have a future in front of me. But in reality, we don't really know when that happened. I do have a little footnote at the bottom that says, we don't really know when this happened. It might have been later. But the old texts kind of waffle between he did it then, or or after that he migrated to Athens and started studying, and then a lot of years later came up with it. So anywhere along that lines, he came up with the Stoic ideas of your thoughts color your soul, whatever color you want them to color. If you wake up in the morning grumpy, you're going to have a bad day. If you wake up in the morning happy, you're going to have a happy day. Now, not guaranteed, of course, something could happen, but you're pointing your ship, your journey in a particular direction. And so that idea of Stoicism has carried through to modern society. For example, and now I'm returning to your question, the AA 12-step serenity prayer is a good example um, of Stoicism. So it has roots going all the way back, but it keeps surfacing and in various ways in modern society. So the 12-step serenity prayers: grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That phrase, even though we use it today to help people who are down and out kind of get control of their life, Stoics would say, no, it's not just for the down and out, it's for you and me. We should be doing that. A lot of times people think of Stoics as somebody who resists pain and denies it and says it doesnn't exist.
Oh,
It is
immediately,
true.
I'm
Go ahead.
thinking of Spock from Star Trek. That's what that's what comes to mind. Stoicism. Okay, but you go ahead. I
Yeah.
interrupted.
Yeah. And so Stoics do feel things and like that. They just try to understand what place it has. And you know how in the book, one of the ways I explained this in the book was I talked about how, how sometimes we spiral.
Right.
Like something will happen in life and we'll just start spiraling. We feel ourselves spiraling into a bad place and we just keep going, and we can't catch ourselves. We just keep going and going and going and going, and all of a sudden we're throwing a fit or doing something really bad, and then 2 days later we're filled with guilt. Why did I do that? What Stoicism is about is coming up with mechanisms to catch yourself as you're falling, to interrupt that spiraling and turn it around. And so this resonates in modern society, to get back to your question,
Yeah.
with therapy, modern therapy. There's a huge portion of modern therapy that comes straight from Stoicism, whether it's CBT or um, view from above. I mean, there's just various things that have roots going all the way back to Stoicism. And by the way, one of the viewpoints of the book is Stoicism's the earliest we know about this. These ideas have probably been around as long as humans could communicate and have advanced ideas. It's just what survives the test of time is very um, nothing survives the test of time, basically, but what we see is remnants of what survived the test of time.
What people have been able to use and keep what seems to be useful and remains true through examination and application of whatever. I mean, these are the things that last. It's interesting that this idea about. I mean, he said, my thoughts and only my thoughts are, what is it? How did you put it? Are causing me
Um,
suffering? Or
that's a quote that comes from Marcus Aurelius in his Meditations. Now, he wrote in Greek, spoke Latin, and then we translated it into English. But basically, it's my thoughts are dyed by the color, like my. Let's see, how's it go? My thoughts are colored. My thoughts are dyed. No, I'm sorry. The modern translation usually cited is my soul is colored by my thoughts.
my soul is colored by my thoughts. It's
Now,
it. I mean,
if I could,
I want to interrupt you here for a second because philosophy. I think that's something that all of us have to develop in some way for ourselves, right? And what
mhm.
you're talking about right here. I mean, I never really studied philosophy in detail. I mean, I've run across things in books or whatever, a reference to Descartes or Sartre or whatever, or all these different. I mean, so there could be a quote or whatever, but it was some years ago when this epiphany came to me, and I forget exactly why it was, but it hit me like a bomb in my head that I was estimating about 90% of my experience is what I think. Now, that was liberating and terrifying at the same time. Um, and that's sort of like what I'm hearing you talk about here, that this, like the merchant who had this experience on the desert island, that this is something that some of us come to at times. It's like this realization that, oh my God, I mean, like all this stuff I think I'm experiencing, I'm mostly thinking it. Um, and you're right. So it goes, and that also relates to the stoicism or what you're saying, and the the legacy of Stoicism throughout our culture to today. I know therapists, and so I understand some of what you're talking about. Yeah, I know some of the techniques, and I could definitely relate to that. I know I cut you off, but were you going to go somewhere, or can I make a suggestion?
Oh, yeah. Well, let me go. I'll go ahead and finish that up, so in case anybody cares.
Right. Yes. Okay.
So,
Please.
so the kind of the fundamental question you were asking is, hey, how many of these ideas carry forward? And my answer was basically, well, all of them.
Yeah.
All the ideas that we have today started someplace. And so, on this exact topic that you're talking about, we already talked about Stoicism and having roots back to 300 BCE in the West, but at the same time in the East with Taoism, Confucianism, Buddhism, all of them, they talk about Maya and the illusions of life and how you might think one thing, but that's not really what's going on. So you need to find mechanisms to deal with it. All that was going on back then, but it's all panned out. So, there are people in life that say, show me, where's the evidence? And I'm one of those type of people.
Hmm.
And the first person I give credit to in the book for accurately talking about our modern concept of this is Hume. He talked about impressions and how life is a series of impressions, and so that you're born a blank slate and you have one impression upon another. I also talk about Al-Farabi and how he during the Islamic Golden Age, he came up with potential intellect, with this concept of intellect. I also talk about that. So there's tabula rasa in the West later as well. Bottom line is, anybody who's had a child, like when my firstborn Felicia was born, I just remember raising her those first few months. It's like I kept saying over and over, Felicia's like a blank piece of paper. Because she knew nothing, and like everything we did was new. And so those impressions, Hume kind of gets credit as a philosopher for kind of coming up with it, but science has backed that up. And one of the interesting thing that dovetails off of what you just said, along the same lines, is that science has understands a bit more about how the mind works, and that when you have your memory, you have deep memories, you have memories that are closer to accessibility, you have your current thoughts. And what they've discovered is that when you bring back a memory, like of an old girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever, and you think about them, or vacation, you bring back a vacation into your head. What they've discovered is, we kind of think that memories are permanent and we just simply recall them and they're always the same. What they discovered is that the process of retrieving a memory from our deep memory into our consciousness is allows we always recolor it. Now, if we have a happy memory of a vacation, we bring it back and we think about it in happy terms, it'll be a happy memory. But if somebody proves to us that, or says to us that, no, that was not a happy time, remember this and that happened, when you bring it back, you could color it negative. And in psychology, in mind theory, they call these things cognitive biases, and they're very identifiable and easy to understand. It's one of the reasons why I focus on critical thinking on touchstonetruth.com. And so, for example, rosy retrospection is what's called thinking about things in the past positively, like and negativity bias is the opposite, And so the human mind actually works simpler than most people would think. Yes, it's super complicated because it's layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of things going on, but ultimately our minds are they need to do on-off switches, and they need to like paint things as good and bad. And to dovetail back to the normalcy and normal thing of Confucianism and my look at that, so when you see in life, when you see a series of plums and one of them is shaped differently than the others, that one is different It's kind of like a, same, not same trigger. And then we end up putting labels, or what psychologists call schemas, or mind theory call schemas, onto fruit. Like, okay, that's different. Okay, now that fruit is different, like that thing over there. Okay, both of those things are ugly to me. So now I've got the concept of ugly, abnormal and ugly. And then this one is beautiful and perfect. Oh, I've got the concept of perfect. Oh, this, and so we have all these schemas that build up over time. So anyway, I just wanted to say that that from ancient times to modern times, there are a lot of ideas that have just spanned out. And the concept that the old Marcus Aurelius quote of your soul is died by your thoughts turns out to be true. Also, in modern times, when people say fake it till you make it, the reason that works is because of what we just talked about. It really works. Not for everything, not for every time, lots of things going on, but in general it does work. And that's why modern therapy works, by the way. Modern therapy simply understands its various components of this, and they implement techniques to help you cope with your thoughts and ideas and like that. And it's just the way our minds work. And it all ties back to ancient thought.
Wow. Wow, amazing. So I was thinking about, like you were talking about your daughter and being a blank slate, and so I was thinking about how we develop ways of making decisions, but it's often, I mean, in the beginning, it's about, does this work or not? Am I going to get fed? Am I going to get hot or cold? Am I going to, is this safe? Is it not safe? And so we're constantly, recording our experiences and like, learn to say if it's good or bad, like you were saying, like with the fruit, that's ugly, that's pretty, whatever. So we're attaching judgments on our experiences and building like a compendium of experience that turns into like our mode of operation. But now philosophy, though, is sort of above that. To me, philosophy is like reaching for an overall perspective. We're looking for a pattern or reaching for ideals. So, can you talk about like where philosophy is and the way of thinking and our how that works as far as our minds are concerned?
Yeah. So for me, I call myself a natural philosopher, meaning I take a look at philosophy from a science first lens. When you talk to professors of philosophy, what they do is they become masters of what various philosophers thought. And then, so if you when you do get to interview philosophy professors, it's really fun to ask about what Confucius thought, what Hume thought, what John Locke thought, and all that. And those are fascinating discussions because they're great ideas. But it's also fun to about we each of us has our own personal worldview, which is comprised of our personal language, our personal religion, and our personal philosophy. That's what chapter 7 in my book is about. So I use Heraclitus to kind of pivot to worldviews and identity and all of that. And so yeah, um, it's it's very true that well, I really want to pivot to Heraclitus and your worldview at this point.
Well, yeah, just go for it. Go for it. Yes, right.
uh, yeah. So one of the so with Heraclitus and your worldview, which is chapter 7 in my book, and we talk about language and religion and philosophy. Worldviews are actually more complicated than that, of course, right? But I mean, there's conscious level and deep subconscious and all of that. And so but I have to present it. I mean, I'm not writing. I mean, my book's got to come to an end at some point. So what I chose is kind of a higher level thing, just to introduce the basic concepts that people grow up in a particular context. And so, for example, if you grow up by the sea, the sound of waves might just resonate with your soul. If you grow up in the East, maybe rice is your staple and is comfort food and you just love it. If you grow up in the West, maybe it's bread.
Hmm.
Whatever these things are, they are. It doesn't really matter. And they do go back to Confucius in my book, which is in chapter 5. A couple chapters earlier than the worldview thing. But so you first you establish concepts like normal and normalcy in your life, and then you build up a language. Languages are imprecise.
Mm.
And by the way, now that we're talking about languages are imprecise, we probably should come back to the absolute truth thing at some point. So make a note of that, because I didn't quite say that the way I wanted to say that. But
Okay.
but with worldviews, you have your own. You grow up in a particular year, a particular environment. In fact, the very first quote of the book, I quote Socrates, and then I talk about how you can different ways that he wrote that in Greek. And when I say um, I mean that he has a famous quote that most everybody knows called "The unexamined life is not worth living."
Yes, I know that one.
And so I immediately talk about how, well, to him it means probably something more complex or more nuanced than what it means to us, but it means something to all of us. I mean, we could all kind of relate to that, and we can talk about it, we can explore it. And the very first chapter, in the very first few paragraphs, I present that statement, and I say that it could have easily been translated as the unexamined life is not worth living. I could translate it to, for a human being, life without introspection is not truly lived. Or
Hmm.
perhaps more succinctly, to life without reflection is not fulfilling.
So this
And
th- this talk this is talking about one's inner life, right? I mean, obviously the introspection has to happen in your thoughts so you're not just living outwardly. You're recognizing your own inner life and taking a look at that. Uh, I mean, it's maybe that's simplifying what you're saying. I don't know.
no, that's actually spot on. For example, just as an anecdote supporting you, Socrates was one of the charges against him was that he was making up gods. And if you get into it, what he did was he talked about your inner voice,
Okay.
your inner coach, and what he thought of it is your philosophy guide. And um, uh, and so in the introduction of the book, and then I bring it back way late in the book, like in chapter, I don't know what, 20 or something. But I say in the introduction, understanding these things will raise the wisdom of your inner voice, your inner coach, your philosopher guide, as Socrates would say. And then I repeat that exact line later on. But it's the concept that, yeah, you have an identity, you have an inner voice. Sometimes people talk about the inner voice as being who you truly are. I mean, that's oversimplification, of course, but it acknowledges what you're talking about, where each of us has an inner presence that we are managing, and like that.
Yes. So one of the things that sort of develops in your book that I want to talk a little bit about is the authentic self, and you come back to it several times, and then it seems to be more developed in recent times, I think, philosophically. But let's talk about the authentic self and the philosophical thought about that, and how it's defined, and how do we get to that?
Yeah, so that's actually dovetails quite nicely on how our conversation is going, because it's an ancient idea that that has survived the test of time. So, in ancient times in the East, in Taoism, they had Wu Wei and Zuran, and these ideas in Taoism uh, basically said you should not do things that are not natural or not part of who you are, not part of your who you want to be. And Heraclitus in the West, going pre-Socratic, going all the way back to 500 BCE,
Hmm.
he his famous quote that kind of survived the test of time, because one of the interesting things is a lot of these guys, none of their stuff survived. And so directly, meaning Heraclitus wrote a bunch of books, but none of them survived. What we have are clips that other people like Aristotle wrote about. Well, Heraclitus had a great idea of this, and then that carried through. And so we know about Heraclitus and what he wrote, not directly. I mean, there are a few snippets that survived, but almost nothing. So, but anyways, so in the West with Heraclitus, he's kind of the earliest one um, who uh, uh, who captured the idea of being authentic, and the quote that he gets is that life is a river, which is not. I mean, that sounds kind of Eastern, right?
Hmm.
Go with the flow, kind of a thing. And so in the East, we had very similar ideas to what was in the West. They carried forward in different ways, but I think they have roots that are in common. And part of all of that. So in my book, the way I present it is that authenticity, or living authentically, or living to your true identity, those ideas started all the way back, both in East and West, in ancient times. And so uh, I'll kind of skip all the intermediate ones, and there are bunches of them, but I'll just go straight to the 1900s and Sartre and existentialism and Heidegger, where basically they talk about concepts like you want to live your authentic self. If you're not living your authentic self, you're lying to yourself. And so, so if in society, when we have things like norms, like with Confucianism, where you're a mother, you need to be a mother, you're a doctor, you need to be a doctor, you're this, you need to be that, and don't vary it. And so one of the push and pull things going on in always, actually, I was going to say in modern society, but always,
Hmm.
is people trying to fill these roles but wanting to do it their way or differently, or be different than they are. They their sexuality, their politics, their opinions, their whatever, it doesn't even matter what they want to be able to go their own way. And so when you talk about an authentic self, you're kind of talking about that. um, and if we got time, I'll just say one more thing about that. Um, for example, sometimes people talk about Nietzsche and nihilism. And so one of the later chapters is on Nietzsche and nihilism.
Hmm.
And if they don't understand it well, they think of it as something dire. And in the book, I talk about nihilistic I present a very dark nihilistic viewpoint in one paragraph, and then I say, "Okay, dark moment over. I hope you don't live like that. I hope So I do present it, but I don't dwell there, and I do present Nietzsche in what I think is a fair way. He wasn't. He didn't even coin nihilism. He borrowed it from somebody a few decades earlier, and basically what he was saying is that um, if you're happy in your life the way you are. So for him, I got to talk a little bit about Christianity and Germany and like that. So Germany and Christianity in the 1800s. What he would say is, if you're happy going to church every Sunday and Wednesday, and listening to everybody's doing what they say and going on those picnics, and you're perfectly happy doing that, keep going. That's your authentic self. All he was saying was, if you're not happy, stop. You need to rip away these social conventions, find out who you are, and live your authentic life. And he had a very interesting and simple test called the eternal recurrence, where he would say, for each thing in your life, like if you're going to church every Wednesday and Sunday, would you want to do that for all eternity? Let's say you live forever. Would you want to do it forever, never and except, never stopping? And if the answer is, yeah, I like church, then go for it. But he also said, if the answer is no, then step away and do something else. Figure out what is authentic for you. And so that's called the eternal recurrence. And that's how I present it in the book, kind of very matter of fact like that. And I'm not saying any one of these tools is correct. I'm just telling the story of when these ideas came about and like that.
Yeah, to me, the the idea of the authentic self is a very powerful one, and it gets to me, it gets to the core of why we ask questions.
Mhm.
That they're why do we ask questions to begin with? Why is there even any curiosity or a need to figure these things out, unless there is some drive in us to it's like seeking a certain kind of empowerment in order to express something that wants to be expressed. I mean, what I'm trying to get at is that I'm trying to find another way of talking about what I'm thinking about as the authentic self. There's so many references in other cultures and other traditions and that sort of thing, but the struggle there, like you were just talking about with Nietzsche, is that when we're looking for what's true for us, we can come in direct conflict with what the world wants us to do. Now, I understand that we need order in the world, and we're an evolving culture, whatever. We need we need to have agreed ways of doing things, that we all say, okay, we're all going to do things this way. We're all going to use the same language so we know what each other's thinking. We're going to drive on the right-hand side of the road, and we're going to have these rules so we don't hit each other and have accidents. So there are important things that we all have to learn to do to get along with one another. But when those things start to encroach on this part of us that really just needs to be something that's not being accommodated in this system, then that's when the struggles come in, I believe. But what's nice about the philosophies, and I think that you talk about, there's many areas in the book where you kind of approach this, that people are thinking about, how do I become better? How do I become better? And that sort of, as a result, I'm making everything better if I get better, because I'm just going to be able to do better. But it keeps pointing back to the individual. That's kind of really my point, that most of what I'm seeing here is bringing responsibility and awareness and freedom to the individual. So what do you think about all that?
All that. Just a small topic.
That's right. Very small topic.
Just to reiterate, kind of keep a theme going.
Yes.
Yeah. There's always been a debate between kind of a Confucian, let's all do what we're supposed to do, and a Taoist, no, let's be free, and like that. And I think that will always be around, because you're right. We do need roles, and plus there are plenty of people that want to be president of the United States. I don't. I wouldn't take that job if you gave me all the money in the world.
I'd be miserable.
And there are plenty of people that want to be school teachers. They just love it. There are people that, my girlfriend Melissa, she's a nanny. She loves it. She was in hospital administration before, filling that role, dealing with doctors who were filling their role, being egotistical and like that, and she would have to fight with them all the time, and she was miserable at it. And she gave that up in order to become a nanny, because she loves working with kids. So we each, that's, first of all, that struggle between roles and living a good life, we all deal with. Sometimes people will get too much into the business side and they'll just push too hard. There's plenty of movies and books about how, the executive who goes so far and they murder somebody and then they feel guilty and like, what have I been doing? Or right before murdering something, they catch themselves and they become a good person, and so, he's filling a role and trying to do all that. And then he's trying to balance it with, wait a minute, what am I doing? Why aren't I just hanging out with my family?
Right.
So yes, I do acknowledge that. And yeah, in the book, which is on the ideas, on all of the ideas of that we've had, ethics, which is what you really were what you were alluding to at one point. Good intent. I use a literary device to talk about that, because I wanted to find something that I could use throughout the book that would help me talk about all the various ethical systems and kind of have a stream of thought throughout the whole book. So I have a literary device I use in there called Good Intent, Good Results.
Right.
And so there are some ethical systems that focus on good intent. Hey, my intent when I gave that homeless person $1,000 was for them to go get a hotel and get cleaned up. The result was he got drunk and stole a car and crashed and killed a bunch of people. Was my ethics right or wrong? So from a good intent viewpoint, you say, no, your intent was good. And from a good results viewpoint, no, not so good. It didn't work.
It didn't work.
And so, right. So in the book, I actually don't present any solution to ethics at all. What I do is, at one point, I do give a formula for kind of a modern idea of a formula for ethics, because there really isn't an absolute, there's an absolute rule, a simple rule. We always want to boil things down to E equals MC squared. And in ethics, so far at least, we don't have that. We have ideas like the categorical imperative. We have ideas like the greatest good, et cetera, but my reading of most ethical systems that are practice is kind of a balance. You go in with good intent. You give a homeless person, or maybe 10 homeless people, $100 each. You see what the result was. If that was too much money, maybe you do $50. Maybe you have to ask a few questions as you give it to them. Maybe you don't give it to them directly. Maybe you instead set up a homeless shelter, or and so you kind of watch both sides of it is kind of where we kind of land. And they're each of us kind of has a formula, a version of that where we manage our intent. We intend to do this, that, and the other, and we kind of watch the results, and we're either happy with it or not. And we all call people who look at bad results as a good thing, as being bad people, things like that.
Right.
So yes, I think you're exactly right on track.
Okay, well, thank you. But as speaking of being on track, I wanted to say, I want to put a plug in because I think that your website is just amazing. I think that your book is amazing. I think that and the most amazing thing about it is how you're able to make all the information that you present very accessible. It's very palatable. You have a knack for putting things into packages that seem to be easily absorbable. And so I would say that anybody who's interested in thought, how they think, I love all of your articles on critical thinking. I think that these are very important concepts, and I would love to talk to you again and get into some of these more things in more depth. But I'm going to recommend people to go to touchstonetruth.com and to also get your book, 30 Philosophers. Amazing piece of work. I would take a college course if that was a textbook. So I would. That's my recommendation.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, Michael, I've loved this conversation. It's been great talking with you today, and I think I would like to do this again some other time.
Absolutely. I hope I didn't ramble on too much.
Oh, no, you rambled on just the right amount, I assure you. Rambling's what we do here. It's the good stuff.
Yeah, that's what life's about. Exactly. Sitting around a fire chit-chatting, looking up at the stars.
Exactly. Well, that is all for this episode of Audible River. And wherever you are on this wonderful planet, we would love to know what you think about our podcast. So please leave a comment or email us at audibleriverpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.